I am going to tell you a story. Well, you knew that already. It's literally the name of the game, after all. It was several years ago, in downtown San Francisco. I had just been to see a concert, and was heading home for the night. It was pretty late, and I didn't have a car, so I was walking to the train station. To get there, I had to pass below a massive overpass, where I had seen quite a few unsavory people hanging out as I came by earlier. And sure enough, to my dismay, was a very large fellow pacing around in my path, twirling around a very large knife, mumbling to himself about I have no idea what. There was no other way to the station, so I tried to quickly walk past, but he noticed me, and it was very clear that he was not all there. "Go back to China, you I'll cut you into 1,000 pieces," he hollered at me. No, this was very odd, because I'm a very white German man, but he was coming at me nonetheless. I hastily pulled out my taser, fired it into the air, and began running. If you've never heard a taser before, they make the most bone-chilling sounds you will ever hear, and apparently it worked, as he reluctantly stopped following me. Unfortunately, this made me miss my train, so I had to wait a while for the very last train of the night, which did not stop anywhere near my station. The train ride itself was uneventful, as train rides should be. But I was not looking forward to the hour-and-a-half walk back to my apartment at midnight after what just happened. I got off as close as it could take me, and began the very long walk home. An hour or so into my walk, I was passing by an abandoned train station, barely lit by a couple of dying lights, when I noticed lying face up on the concrete a young woman. She did not seem to be moving. I didn't really want to talk to any more strangers in the dark that night, but there was no one else around, and she clearly was not all right. So I walked over and poked her and asked if she was all right. Thankfully, she was. She was simply a bit lost, and how do I say this without being moderated? She was over the moon. After what had just happened, I figured it was probably unsafe for her to wander around the city alone all night. So I asked where she lived and if she'd like me to walk her home, and she said sure. So we headed off, in a very meandering path, roughly in the direction of where she lived, and we began to chat. And it was one of the most interesting conversations I have had in my entire life. She told me that her name was Dianakochov. She was a Russian-born Persian woman. I didn't even know Persians still existed. She had moved to America very young, and soon after been orphaned, and she had spent the rest of her youth bouncing around the foster system before aging out of it. She had since become an undocumented pharmacist, one might say, and had been shot twice in the leg. She had the scars to prove it. She was absolutely convinced that the moon didn't actually exist, and that it was actually a military space station that they had strategically covered up with clouds during maintenance. It turned out that she was actually 1 day older than I was, which we did not stop joking about for the rest of the night. She was, to say the least, a very interesting person. At some point during our walk, I don't remember the context, she said something that still sticks with me to this day. "We rise by lifting others up." I'm fairly sure I had heard that saying before, but it hadn't stuck with me if so. But it did that time. An elegantly simple, yet extremely meaningful statement. It is to this day my personal and company motto. Eventually, we finally made it to her neighborhood. I waved her goodbye and thanked her for the wonderful conversation and wished her well. She did the same back and walked off. and I began the very long walk back to my apartment, which thankfully remained uneventful for the rest of the night. I never saw her again. I learned something very important. That everyone changes the world. Anyone who's watched a time travel movie knows that if you go back in time and change something small, it will radically change the future. But barely anyone in the present really thinks that they will radically change the future by doing something small. Every action you take changes the world dramatically, and will affect the lives of thousands of people. Every action you take affects someone, and they then affect someone else because of that, and they affect someone else, and so on. Though you will probably never see even a tiny fraction of it. A lifetime of those actions, and you've changed the world in a very significant way, and changed the lives of millions in some way or another. The things Dianakochov and I talked about still affect and change the decisions I make to this day. The security guard at the concert I was at decided not to confiscate my taser. I don't know why she didn't. After all, she had confiscated my pepper spray. But that one decision could have made this a very, very, very different story. And that would have changed every action I've ever made since. You don't get to choose if you're going to change the world or not. You already have. And you are going to keep changing it for the rest of your life. The choice you get to make is how. Will your small acts of kindness forever make the world a better place? Or will your small acts of hate forever make it worse? That only you can decide.